Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cassie with AABC, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Tab Talk webinar. I also want to thank our sponsor, Siemens, for supporting this session. Just a few items to cover before we get started. Our presenter will be holding questions until the end of the presentation, but we encourage you to submit them at any time using the Q&A button. If you happen to experience technical problems during the webinar, please use the chat function to inform the panelists so that our producer, Will, can assist you. This presentation is being recorded and it will be available for viewing in 1 week. In terms of continuing education credit, everyone in attendance for the full webinar will receive a certificate of attendance sent to their email within 24 hours. And finally, if you're a certified TBE or TBT, your CEUs for attending any webinar in this series will be automatically uploaded to your respective portal after the webinar. Our presentation for today is Digital Strategies for Enhanced Tab and Commissioning. Please welcome today's speaker, Chris Pelton of Siemens Smart Infrastructure. He leads their Smart Building Solutions team focused on early engagement and design phase strategies to improve project outcomes. In his 35-year career in the mechanical construction industry, he has served in engineering, sales, and management positions at Carrier, Dow Chemical, and Siemens. Chris is an engineering graduate of the University of Texas and resides in St. Louis, Missouri. Without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Chris to kick us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Chris Pelton. Appreciate you joining for our discussion for this month's Tab Talk around digital strategies for enhanced tab and commissioning. This is an AI accredited program, as you heard a moment ago. And today what we're going to go over from an agenda standpoint is just some overall macro trends in the industry that are affecting digitalization and the TAB and commissioning phase of work during construction. Some of the tools that are available and analytics available today to enhance project execution. Have a conversation around what can be done during the design phase to enable these types of digital strategies, and then also look at how they apply for the existing, building diagnostics and tab work as well. So that's what we plan on going over, and I thought a place that we could start would be to take a look at kind of what's been happening post-construction, because there's some parallels I think that can be drawn with what we're seeing in the construction phase of work as well. And so this graph was created by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and it's a comparison of buildings that were constructed in the 60s versus buildings that were constructed, in this century. And we'll talk a little bit more about both, but what's interesting and sort of understandable is those older buildings, you've seen sort of a steady increase over the 3 surveys that were taken from 2003, 2012, and 2018. A steady kind of decrease in the energy intensity in those buildings, whereas if you look on the right, the buildings that were constructed in the 2000s have a better overall performance, but you've actually seen that creeping in the wrong direction in terms of the amount of energy consumption. And some of that certainly can be attributable to the increase in plug load, but there's other sort of underlying reasons behind it that we'll talk about a little bit more. LEED was introduced, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, by the EPA, and it was launched formally in 2000. So you may have heard stories where buildings perform well at the turnover to the owner, but over time they continue to creep up in terms of their energy use. And you can see in some instances, like lighting, for example, the lighting in energy intensity in the older buildings actually was better than the lighting intensity, in the newer buildings that were built. So, there's sort of an underlying question around, why are we seeing these kinds of results? So it's understandable in the older buildings that were pneumatic controls, back in that era, would naturally have an improvement in performance through the conversion of controls from pneumatic to DDC, the improvement in lighting technology and the transition to LED lighting, changing things from constant speed to variable speed. So these are all understandable factors that have impacted the improvement in performance of these older buildings. But if you look at the newer buildings, why would it be that these buildings are actually performing more poorly than when they were originally put in? And a lot of this really stems from the increase in complexity of the buildings, more of the, as we strive for energy efficiency, there's more processor-based controls on the equipment itself. There's more complexity in the sequences of operation, coupled with sort of the main underlying issue that's affecting the industry and the facility staff and the buildings that we work in, is that there's just less experience about how the systems are supposed to work. There's less familiarity with the digital side of the systems that are being installed. And then in general, there's just fewer people entering the industry to serve in this way. So digitalization has, its upside and its downside. And in this case, the lack of familiarity as buildings become more complex has actually caused them not to necessarily be maintained in an optimal way. And so that change, that increase in complexity of the buildings and the decrease in the available staff coming into the industry runs parallel with what we're seeing during construction, and the tight labor market for all the different trades are impacting our, collectively our ability to deliver projects. So the scarcity of local field staff is one of those areas that is, whether it's post-construction or during construction, is impacting us, and digital technologies can help overcome that. Similarly, as we shift into this arena where all the operational technologies are dependent upon some form of network availability, that can become a real pinch point as we get towards the startup and commissioning and test and balancing of these systems that are dependent on the electronic DDC controls. And oftentimes we're not really sure when to deploy manpower to the project, because we're not sure if all the trades in front of us are necessarily ready for the controls contractor to complete their work and for the tab contractor to be able to complete their work. So these are things that digital strategies can help alleviate. And then the last part is around when can we feel assured that the system's really functioning as designed, as contracted. And so digital solutions are really allowing that to be addressed as well. So today, things have evolved to a point where with some early planning, you can really leverage digital solutions to improve the overall project outcome, the transparency, the speed. And it starts with mobilization. And when you get involved early on the project, BACnet SC hasn't seen wide adoption. That stands for BACnet Secure Connect, but that will be an enabler of these digital solutions moving forward, because BACnet SC is based on the TCP/IP data transfer protocol that IT departments are more familiar with. So naturally, it's more secure from a cybersecurity standpoint, but it also brings benefits to the owners in terms of data throughput. Some of the larger institutional users that have very slow reaction time of their BAS systems will benefit from that more direct point-to-point data communications that BACnet SC provides. So we'll see more of that. It doesn't necessarily impact the tab contractor directly, but it will enable the ability for IT departments to be more comfortable with secure remote connectivity, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few minutes. And then most importantly, that early network availability to all the subsystems that require network to be commissioned and to function properly. And today, that's not just the BAS system that we're both involved with, but it's also all the operational technologies. So whether it's lighting control or fire alarm or security or audio-visual systems, all those systems have some dependency on that network. So having conversations and strategies around how to get that network established earlier is an important part of the process and consideration to make essentially a lot of these digital approaches won't really work without having that network availability. But once that network's established, then that opens the door for a whole new host of network and system diagnostic tools that can help ensure that the system is commissioned properly, and even during the course of construction, to report on how ready are the systems for the TAB contractor, for the commissioning agent. And so now there's ways to query the system that provide that type of information. And then once that is established and the systems have been balanced, now there's an opportunity to digitally provide commissioning reports that validate the operation of the systems. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well, as a mechanism to prove out that the systems are functioning properly. And that network dependence that we talked about, there's also ways that reports can be generated to confirm that the backnet systems and the data throughput are working appropriately. And once you reach the warranty phase, using these digital connectivity and digital approach allows the use of FDD and other tools to ensure that the systems are functioning as intended through the seasonal changes that occur during the warranty period. So there's a whole host of new ways that digital can be leveraged to improve the project, the pace of the project, as well as the outcomes of the project. So here are just a couple quotes around this idea that the digital era is really allowing tasks to be performed remotely. So that remote connection that can be provided for the purposes of adding additional resources to support the HVAC controls installation can also be made available if it's useful to the TAB contractor or to other contributors on the project, so that you have eyes into what's going on in the field through that remote connectivity. And that remote diagnostic and monitoring capability applies not only during the construction phase, but it also benefits facility staff who are shorthanded by being able to remotely diagnose situations that are going on. And really, digital has become a way of life. It's essential to the sustainability and efficiency. So these are just a couple of quotes that kind of validate the idea behind the importance of getting this network up and running and getting the secure connectivity to the site prior to completion of construction. So we'll talk for a couple of minutes about some of these digital tools and data analytics that can be used to validate performance, to track progress on the projects, and discuss some of the ways that can be impactful. So really, it's about speed and transparency. It's about using these digital commissioning reports to be able to share, electronically validate the performance of a given VAV terminal or air handler, without necessarily having to go to every single box location to perform that work. And so this is done through simulation scripts that can be basically taking the equipment through its paces. The ASHRAE 36 guideline around high performance sequences is one mechanism that's being used to kind of standardize those scripts. And so this sort of reporting can allow just more visibility into what's going on, and having potentially defined milestones where these types of reports will be provided as the project progresses. And it also provides a baseline for the performance of the systems for comparison down the road, to say this is how the system was performing during the functional test, during the commissioning, and just provide that snapshot to be referred back to. So this can be accomplished once the TAB work is completed, and it can be done in a phased way, and it can be done on the entire system once it's ready for commissioning. So we found that this is going to become a bigger part of our day-to-day workflow as things move forward. And so from a performance validation standpoint, we're able to provide and this is available to the industry widely, this Optigo visual backnet as a tool to um, validate the performance of a system. If you have a BAS system that's performing well, but then you integrate it with a lighting control system, and all of a sudden you have the ability to analyze that data flow through other systems that are being connected to the BAS that detrimentally impact the performance of the system. And so one of the things that can be done using these strategies is to provide a dashboard for the owner that shows on the key systems that are, uh, most important for their operation, to be able to look at the performance of the systems in a snapshot. How are things operating right now? And then having that secure connectivity established, during the construction phase, opens the door to other potential ways that the digital solutions can allow supplement the staff of the facilities team. So today, some of the tools that we've used in the past have been enhanced to where we can actually use these commissioning tools to assign work to different technicians, for example, or to show the status of which work's completed, which work is yet to be completed, and provide that transparency to the project team, to the prime subs, to the GC, to the commissioning agent. So really having a good snapshot of who's doing what's the completion status, and using it as these types of tools as a communication tool if you have multiple people working on a site. So it's becoming easier to leverage digital to really more effectively deploy your people and provide visibility and reporting back to the project team on how things have progressed and how far along they are. And so the idea of project execution progress monitoring, like I mentioned, is an area where now you can really provide this back to the tier, to everyone that's involved, to say, here's where we stand. We don't have all the utilities that we need necessarily to be able to complete the work, and providing that testing back is a mechanism that can be used to really just enhance communication, leveraging digital tools. And so we're seeing this type of transition happening in the TAB community as well, from the standpoint that now there's companies like NAB and Blue Rhythm that are providing similar types of commissioning functionality to put at the fingertips of the TAB contractor. And it should create an opportunity in the future where, using APIs or other forms of data integration, that there would be an opportunity, for example, to have equipment tags and schedules, exported from the BAS, into tools like these that the TAB contractors use, or data from the TAB contractors could be assembled and incorporated into a broader commissioning report, along with what's provided by the controls provider, as a combined report that can be provided back to the owner and the commissioning agent. So the industry as a whole is moving in this direction, and it's important that we have the right infrastructure in place earlier than traditionally has been there, in order to make these types of solutions a reality moving forward. So during the design phase, it's really, you need to start early around the ways that you would implement these types of solutions, and especially around the network availability, as we discussed. So as you've probably experienced, we really can't get to our work until we have those fundamental, what we'll call project utilities, in place. Obviously, we have to have power. The network has to be in place. We have to have water flow and airflow and the visibility into the space conditions. And so we, as an industry and a controls provider, and all the others have experienced the same, where we're being asked to commission the project, but the equipment's not really ready for us to commission. So now we're in a position that we can provide reporting to say this particular unit, based on our simulation, has no water flow or has no airflow. So we can provide that type of reporting and bring visibility collectively, for all the trades that are impacted, to the need for having these things available, and providing that transparency of whether the trades in front of us are really completing their work per the schedule, or if we're going to have to, either as a tab contractor or as a controls provider, either add additional staff or work overtime to try and achieve those dates. So it's all about providing transparency into what's really happening in the field, and that can be done without necessarily traveling to the job site. It can be done through running reports, using that remote connectivity to gain visibility into the readiness of the systems that are on the project. So bringing visibility to this need earlier is one of the ways during the design phase that we have, an opportunity to influence, our work and our staffing, on projects that we're working on. And so, as I mentioned, prioritizing electronic connectivity is really one of the keys, is getting engaged with the IT department earlier on to try and determine, do we need a temporary network, which is often the case, but that can be prevented potentially by working with the IT department, for example, to install network switches that comply with their standards. So having that in, working with the design engineer to ensure that the switches that are being provided by all the different operational technology providers meet a standard that those switches can be reused once the project is past the stage of commissioning. And then additionally, what we've seen a trend is the prime contractors are really trying to build into the schedule having telecom space that's clean earlier in the project. So oftentimes, that may have been the IDF or MDF or the space where these network switches reside to serve the operational technologies. The spaces just aren't protected. They're not clean. They're not ready. And we've seen more of an emphasis on addressing that in a way that a permanent network can be installed. And so that's really where we're encouraging the industry as a whole to put more effort towards establishing that electronic connectivity, to giving consideration to having a converged network that serves multiple technologies. It's easier to protect, it's less expensive to install, but it certainly requires earlier engagement in order for that to happen. And then, Wi-Fi planning, PoE planning, these are all areas that sort of tie into that discussion. So that Wi-Fi availability can be an enabler for the trades that are working on the project. So this is an area where we're seeing greater emphasis being placed, on all the project stakeholders, and it is sort of a prerequisite for trying to use digital approaches to the execution of the work. And then secure remote connectivity is another area where there's more than one way to do it, and it depends on the customer's comfort level of where the firewalls are, what type of connectivity is acceptable. But this allows remote support, as I mentioned, for the execution of the work, the programming, the testing of the systems, the diagnosis of issues that might be happening in the field without necessarily having to go out to the job to get to the root cause. And then another capability that can be considered through this early engagement is around IT and connectivity is the use of cellular service. So if you're working in a vertical market where there's an aversion to having any sort of external connection, then cellular service is another alternative that allows you to have that visibility into what's happening in the on the job site without even touching the IT infrastructure, of the owner whatsoever. So there's different ways to get there, but that remote connectivity is something that once it's established, it can benefit more than just say the controls contractor. There could be use cases or benefits for the tab contractor and the commissioning agent and others once that connectivity to the site is established. In IT, departments are getting more comfortable as more and more solutions are moving to the cloud. It's just becoming a little bit more of a norm. And while there's still concerns around cybersecurity, obviously, BACnet SC is one of the ways that can be addressed, but it's more viable today, I would say, than it's been in years past. So this is another mechanism that can be used to improve remote support in all categories on the projects. And another strategy that we've seen work is the idea of getting pre-approval of using these digital methodologies. So the mock-up that's shown pictorially on the right is not pretty, but it is an example of where you can get with the owner and the commissioning agent and the general contractor and really, as the steel's going up before any of the mechanical equipment's installed, explain and show these are the types of simulation scripts that we're going to use. This is the methodology that we're recommending, where maybe in the past the specs only required to spot check 10% of the of the VAV terminals, for example. But if this methodology is improved, it's a win-win for the project stakeholders, the owner and the commissioning agent, as well as for the controls contractor and the tab contractor, because now this can be pre-approved. You can do 100% instead of just 10%, and it's really, I think, will become a growing trend of getting this type of digital reporting and documentation to be accepted, particularly if you get in front of it and show people what they can expect when you get to that phase of work. So some more opportunity here. Again, some of these things that we're sharing this afternoon are in place today, and just we'll see more maturity in the industry in the years to come. But we know in practice that they work, and they can be leveraged by project teams regardless of who the controls provider is. And so that's another consideration to keep in mind as you're moving forward. So talking for a moment about digital strategies for existing building applications, I know that you probably get engaged with diagnostics and improvements to airflow for duct systems that are pipe systems that have been modified. And so these, leveraging digital for that existing building stock that we talked about at the beginning is trending in the wrong direction in some cases. It is also, more practical today than it was in the past. So if you look in the past, typically, if you were trying to do existing building commissioning or recommissioning, you would identify what you believe to be, the top 20% or the worst 20% that you want to go focus your effort on. And you had to do that because, the labor costs associated with testing the entire system would make that cost prohibitive. So you'd pick what you believe to be the worst. You'd fix the issues that you found on that particular portion of it, but there'd still be a large percentage of the system that you did not have. You weren't in a position where you could afford to address the system as a whole. And so today, through digital technologies, you can test the entire system and you can gather all that data. So data acquisition has been made much more practical, really through the use of IT protocols. So over and above uses of industry protocols like BACnet and Modbus. Today, once you get that data out into the cloud or into an environment that's more IT integration, there's an opportunity to pull that data out of systems that has been simplified in recent years, and make it more practical to test the entire thing. So without any dramatic impact on the cost in relation to how it was done in the past. So this is really sort of changing the industry in a positive way, but it's also requiring more people to become familiar and comfortable with working in the digital environment. And just to provide a couple of examples in that regard, here's an example of using data, digital analytics, to validate the operation of a chill water valve. And what it indicates is that there reaches a point that even at full open on the valve, you're not meeting the target conditions in the space. And so this could be an insufficient coil, it could be a need for additional water flow, but now there's ways to expedite the analysis of issues by virtue of using this data collection and data analytics to aid in the diagnostics and remediation of issues on systems that have been modified or changed over the years. And similarly, even the performance data that we receive from the vendors, and in this case it's an example of a pump, can be more easily evaluated. Is the published data from this given manufacturer actually valid or not? And so there's a way to basically use data to validate the performance that's received from the manufacturers, or to identify, not achieving the design conditions that are presented by the consultants involved with the project. So this is just another mechanism that really allows, folks in the tab arena to leverage digital to improve the performance of the systems. And so just a couple of other, quotes in this regard. And, the top quote is really talking about data quality. And I think that's a key role that the tab community plays is, just because it's digital doesn't mean that it's accurate. So whether that's referring to data coming from the manufacturers of the equipment, or whether that's just confirming that the data that's coming from some of these digital tools that are being used in the field is accurate, that's a key role that will that will continue to be needed. That's a big part of the value that you bring to these projects, and validating the operation of, that these digital data that's being collected is accurate. And so this is creating a new opportunity in the industry for technicians that have both the digital capability and the understanding of the how mechanical systems are supposed to work as the sequences continue to get more complex. So I think it's a good opportunity, honestly, for your facet of the industry to take advantage of these types of solutions, and to use sharing of data through the life cycle of a project to benefit the owner. And so that's another consideration to keep in mind. And so, in summary, early attention to these types of strategies can really benefit everyone, and that goes from the owner to all the trades that are working under the prime contractor. And in order to leverage those types of capabilities, we really need to establish that network connectivity and availability as a key driver in benefiting from these types of changes. And then that above site or off site connectivity can be a real enabler to allow people to see what's happening on the job site, to supplement their local field personnel that are on the project, and really deploy them in the right levels at the right times by having that transparency into what's happening, on site without physically being there necessarily. And this can be applied as we looked at to existing systems as well. So it's kind of an exciting time, in our industry, and I think the tab contractor provides a key role, like we talked about, regarding data quality and performance validation, to not just take it for granted that what's coming out of this digital type of output has not been manipulated or is in error. So those are at a high level the kinds of things that we wanted to share and get feedback. And I have one final quote here that actually are a couple quotes that actually come from the AABC organization. The TAB journal back this spring was had an article that really mentioned that this is a paradigm shift in how commissioning is done and how automating onboarding new systems and buildings is happening, and it's moving relatively quickly. And then the last paragraph around streamline process, the real driver that we'll see the continued adoption of these types of strategies is really the time reduction in the commissioning phase, and really wherever possible using digital strategies and tools to alleviate what might have had to have been done in the past manually. So that's what we had to share this afternoon. And at this point, we can open up to Q&A.
All right, Chris, thank you so much for that presentation. We'll get started with some questions. We've got some coming into the Q&A already. And those of you listening, if you've got other questions as the Q&A goes on, please add them in that function and we will get to as many as we can. The first one we've got is, how do I convince an owner that these solutions are safe to use remotely without any threat to their information being vulnerable to hackers?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's sort of a fundamental shift that I think the key is to try and get to the right people within the IT department. And I think one of the mechanisms to do that is to work through the current service providers that are working with some of those boots on the ground IT staff on a regular basis, to enlist their help to get to the right people that are involved with those decisions of that remote connectivity, and to be able to provide references of others that are doing it safely. But cybersecurity is an area where it's a high degree of visibility and concern, and if you get to the right people and you do it early, usually you can find ways to mitigate that concern by showing how others have been doing it, and really to demonstrate what methodologies align with how the owner's comfort level is for that remote connectivity.
All right, next up, someone asked, how do you implement this system on an existing building? How do you know what hardware, software, programming you need, and how much it will cost to implement?
That's a great question. So, today there are tools available that you can implement relatively inexpensively on a given piece of equipment, for example, that can be installed on a temporary basis to extract the information needed to have the appropriate trend data. So it depends a little bit on the scale, but what we found is that in order to sort of prove out the benefits of this type of strategy, it can be done in a progressive manner where start small, pick one piece of equipment, and see what data can be gleaned from the system that's available already, and if there's additional instrumentation. But start small and try, proof of concept, if you will. Pick one location, see how well instrumented it is for the types of tests or analysis that need to be done, and then that's probably the best way to start to manage the costs associated with that.
All right, next up, we've got a question from Zach. He says, can you speak to the process on how project teams slash owners are engaged to employ these sorts of technologies? What does it look like when CXPs are involved later in the process? Is the controls contractor selling this, or is it a recommendation from the CXP, or are owners savvy enough to require it in project docs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that collectively, it's kind of our responsibility to help educate the owner community in the benefits that they can receive from deploying these types of digital strategies. So that's an ongoing process that controls providers and commissioning agents and others can bring that visibility so that there's a comfort level. But the commissioning agents are a good place to start to to coordinate and collaborate on how to leverage these types of solutions because it benefits them as much as it benefits any of the other project stakeholders. And there is, I think, a, a growing interest on the part of the general contracting community to do their part to bring these expectations to the owner because it's it's I would say it's a collective effort, but you have to start early. And if you get the commissioning agent on board and the general contractor on board, then they can usually help engage with the owner to express the importance of trying to follow these types of approaches. And I would say too that it's the question around whether this is something that's intended to be sold. I think it's really more inherently how you're going to see uh, controls work executed in the future. So it's going to become part of the mainstream execution methodologies over time, and it's not really intended to be treated as sort of a value add or a voluntary alternate. It's just the way controls work is conducted in the field, in the future.
All right, next up from Nathaniel, we have the question, would you recommend that network health be reviewed before starting digital functional testing? Who is typically responsible for assessing network health within a building, owner or construction team?
Yeah, I would say it depends a little bit on, whether the owner's network is being utilized or whether the operational technology networks are being completed on behalf of the or by the construction tier and then turned over to the owner as a functional system. So I think it varies a little bit on where those lines are drawn. But I can say that from the perspective of a controls provider, in order for the systems that we're delivering to function correctly, that responsibility kind of relies on us to provide those types of network health reports as part of the execution of our work. And so that would be used by the field technicians as a diagnostic tool, during the firing up all the DDC controllers and that type of thing. But then it would, once that work was complete and the tab and the commissioning work was complete, then that network health report, sort of after the diagnostics are complete and the systems are running, can be delivered to the owner to show them that the systems are functioning properly. And if the IT infrastructure is being provided by the owner and it's done early enough in the project, they may very well have their own network health diagnostic tools that they're comfortable with that could be utilized in that situation instead. So it's a little bit of a function of who's providing the system and where those demarcation points are, I guess, if that helps.
All right, next up, this question says, are you seeing any drive towards haystack slash brick tagging being built in by BAS vendors?
Yes, that's another enabler actually. The semantic tagging is another mechanism that is making commissioning of systems, creation of graphics in particular is another area that is just a huge time saver when you have that semantic tagging. And it's also beneficial from an analytics standpoint. post construction. So that is a growing trend that I think will be another sort of digital enabler, moving forward. I would agree.
All right, the next question says, this type of solution seems like it would put the CM at risk because you can see the status of the project at any time. This will allow us to call the CM's bluff if they say systems are ready when they really aren't. Do you have a different angle to sell this to CMs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that transparency is, depending on who is being exposed, for lack of a better term, could be viewed as a negative thing, or maybe they don't want that information, you know, shared in a broader group and want to have some control over what's being communicated around the progress of the sub trades. So I think that this sort of shift to the digital uh, reality or future is some of that is just going to become inherent in the way work is executed, but being conscious of those types of concerns where maybe that so that becomes more of a, I would say, a business decision and a conversation with all the stakeholders um, as to how transparent maybe do you want to be, or where what's the boundaries around where this information is shared. But I think that question is a valid concern. I think we want to be able to prove that the systems are functioning, or that we can't start our work because the work in front of us or the airflow and the water flow aren't there. And the exposing the truth is a good thing, but you have to be conscious of the implications it has for the different stakeholders of the project, and certainly the general contractor or the CM at risk needs to be involved in that discussion and those decisions early on. So I mean, it's a valid point that was made.
So, Chris, what obstacles do you see in taking advantage of digitalization during the testing and commissioning phase of construction projects?
Yeah, I think that it's some of the things that we've talked about. It's getting the owner and the IT department comfortable with that remote connectivity that has a number of different benefits. It's really the idea of starting the conversation of how are we going to um, get these things connected digitally so that we can start sharing data between systems and start using some of these digital reports. So I would say the obstacles are really around just the adoption and the preparation of the network spaces within the facility, of having them ready sooner. So I think those are some of the key obstacles that the more that it's being done in the industry, the sooner the comfort level will grow.
All right, and how can tab contractors help promote digital strategies and benefit from their adoption?
Yeah, I think if you share the belief that this can be beneficial in ensuring that you're sending your people out at the right time and that the systems are ready for you before you get there, then promoting the use of these kinds of tools to the project team, for those members of the project team that you can influence, whether it's a relationship with a commissioning agent or with some of the electrical trade. I think that's one of the keys, is just that education part that we talked about a little bit, is to collectively, for all of us that benefit from taking advantage of these efficiency gaining capabilities and transparency, that we can collectively recommend and bring visibility and share experiences and references where we've done that kind of work and proven that it's beneficial. Then I think that's one of the key areas where the tab community could contribute.
All right, well, it looks like those are all of the questions. Thank you so much, Chris, for this excellent presentation and discussion. And thank you to Siemens for sponsoring. Last but not least, thank you to everyone who joined us today. Before we wrap up, I want to remind you all that we've got one more Tab Talk webinar for you in 2024. So be sure to join us on December 4th for leakage and deflection testing of air handling units with Jeff Keane. You can learn more and register for this at aabc.com/webinars. And thank you again for your valuable time in participating in this webinar, and we will see you at the next one.